A mile beneath the sea in the Gulf of Mexico, a wellhead is leaking. It's creating one of the largest oil spills in U.S. history. The slick is threatening hundreds of miles of the nation's coastline. It all began with an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig.
You're out there on a rig, a fire breaks out, there's not a whole lot of places for you to go.
Time is of the essence. You know, you got somebody in the water, you want to get there as fast as you can.
I just remember being just scared to death. I kept thinking we're all dead.
It's a story of heroism, a yet unseen battle to stop the burning rig from sinking.
I could feel the intensity of the flames through the fuselage of the airframe.
In terms of intensity, in terms of heat, it's like nothing I've ever seen before.
It was like looking into the face of the devil.
This is the inside story of the first 36 hours of an economic and environmental disaster that killed 11 men and gripped the entire world.
It was the initial explosion, it was the missing people, it was the rig sinking, trying to shut off the source. This continues to unfold.
Couldn't slow down because I think I see something right off the bow.
In the Gulf of Mexico, a massive cleanup operation is underway. An armada of nearly 1,000 vessels battles to contain an oil slick being fed by an uncapped well. It's spewing out crude from the ocean floor. In the disaster's early hours, no one could have predicted the events that would unfold. It's 10 p.m., the evening of April 20th, in the Gulf of Mexico. The Deepwater Horizon, a floating oil rig, has suffered a massive blowout. 126 people are on board. Some are asleep. Among them, oil rig worker Chris Choi.
I heard the first explosion, and I sat up and sat on the edge of the bed, just wondering what it was. That's when the second larger explosion went off. I just remember being just scared to death.
The explosion was so violent that the first distress calls to the U.S. Coast Guard came from rigs and boats that were miles away.
I took the call. The person was panicking. The person was telling me that there was a rig is on fire and he can see it.
The officer on duty and the man who must decide how to respond is Lieutenant Nathan Houck.
When we received a report from a man that said that an entire rig was on fire with over 100 people on board and people were jumping overboard. There's no waiting around for that. That's an immediate response. We launched everybody that we had available. We also launched every helo that we could find. Initially, when the first report came in, we didn't know whether or not there was over 100 people in the water.
Although the details are sketchy, the pilots racing to the rig know this could be one of the toughest challenges they've ever faced.
The adrenaline starts flowing immediately. Your heart starts racing immediately. There's a sense of urgency. The 4 Coast Guard helicopters that are scrambling only have a limited capacity, and there could be over 100 people in the water.
The initial explosion was 115 nautical miles away from our base. We can at most rescue 3 to 4 people at a time. Where are we going to take them? What's their condition? At the time we launched, we didn't know any of this information.
The Deepwater Horizon is 50 miles off the coast of Louisiana, but over 120 miles from the Coast Guard helicopter rescue base, nearly an hour's flying time.
I could see the glow of the burning rig at 90 miles away. I knew this was big.
I could see this immense glow on the horizon. It looked like that I was flying to New York City.
For those who survived the initial blast and the fires that follow, the rig becomes a living hell.
First thing I saw, the ceiling was on fire. There's a walkway right above me. That walkway was on fire. I turned around to go back to the front of the rig, and that's when I saw the flames. As soon as I saw that, I knew there was no way we were going to put it out. We were just going to get off of there, I was sure.
We were hovering about half a mile to the east of the burning rig, and I could feel the intensity of the flames through the fuselage of the airframe. And I was looking into this burning hulk of metal, and it was like looking into the face of the devil.
It's the Coast Guard's job to save as many as possible, and that can mean putting their own people into the sea.
When you're out there on a rig, fire breaks out, there's not a whole lot of places for you to go.
Firefighting ships in the oil fields are already on the scene. They're trying to extinguish an inferno on a rig that was once worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Deepwater Horizon isn't a conventional oil rig with legs. It's a semi-submersible vessel used to drill new wells. Once in position, her two pontoons are flooded with seawater, ballasting her down to make a stable platform. She can operate at depths of up to 8,000 feet. Once the drill is secured to the ocean floor, the debris and mud is transported back to the surface via a riser pipe. The rig remains exactly in position using thrusters in the legs and satellite positioning systems. Those systems are now obliterated. The only thing holding the rig in place is the riser pipe. When rigs or ships burn or are in danger of sinking, elite teams of salvage experts are called in. A salvage company based in Houston is scrambling all their resources to get out to the rig.
There's 1,000 bits and pieces that compile a mobilization of any sort, especially a major one in this regard. You've got to get people in motion, and you've got to get equipment in motion so that no time is wasted on the emergency.
The Salvors face a 390-mile journey from Houston to the Louisiana coast before they can catch a boat out to the rig. But in salvage, nothing is left to chance. A backup team is being called in from Holland. They're specialists at fighting fires at sea. But no one knows how long the rig can survive the fire and stay afloat. In the Gulf of Mexico, the Coast Guard is still searching for survivors. The only hope is that the workers on board have already found a way off the rig.
I kept thinking we're all dead. I hadn't seen anybody until this point. I didn't know if I was the only person still on the rig or what. I run back to the front. My chief mate is running down there towards me. He's hollering, I can see the crane operator that fell. He said, I can see him down over by the starboard crane and I can't get to him. While we were trying to get over there, there was some more explosions and it just put flames in between us and the crane operator. And we didn't have a choice but to turn around, which is a horrible thing to have on your mind, that you know you were right there next to somebody that you couldn't help. And everybody started hollering to abandon the rig. I got the number 2 lifeboat, and that was the lifeboat that most of the hurt people were in, the injured guys were in.
Chris Choi and his injured colleagues are lucky. A rig supply vessel working in the area finds them and hauls them on board.
At that point, we had a little bit of hope that we were going to be able to rescue some people.
They wanted us to pick up the critically injured first, the ones who weren't able to walk.
Coast Guard showed up, I want to say 30 to 45 minutes after we got on the boat. They sent a couple guys down to help us.
The The couple of guys are the Coast Guard's elite rescue swimmers, men who are prepared to risk everything by going into the water or onto ships to save the drowning or injured.
Swimmer and swimmer 30 aft. Down there. Roger, hold position. I'm going to bring them down.
It's going out the door. Your adrenaline's just running. You're excited. You get on the boat, and then you see all these people that are injured, and it's kind of like, what do I do?
10 people at the rail.
When I first went in, my rescue swimmer, Kurt Peterson, said, this is who we want to get out first. He's got really low vitals. He had a severe laceration to his neck, screamed in pain. So I was like, all right, well, let's get him going.
Survivors getting in the basket very slowly.
The Coast Guard swimmers on the boat need to assess which survivors are most in need of urgent care.
There's people with multiple leg fractures, blisters, charred skin. It's seeing that it's really undescribable.
Wait a minute, back and left. Okay, survivors at the door.
The critically injured are flown to hospitals in Alabama and Louisiana. 115 of the 126 who were on the rig are now accounted for.
Developing story to tell you about this morning. The Coast Guard is searching for at least 11 missing oil rig workers off of the coast of Louisiana. They vanished after an explosion last night. Search teams are hoping that they are on lifeboats in the Gulf of Mexico.
It's now been 8 hours since the Deepwater Horizon exploded. The fire is slowly destroying the platform, and explosions continue to cause further damage. If it's to be saved, the salvage team needs to get on board soon. Assistant Salvage Master James Waite leads an advance party. He's an expert at fighting fires at sea after being a sea captain for 17 years.
Well, the phone rang early in the morning, and basically the conversation went like this: Jim, how fast can you pack? Hit the road. We've got a rig on fire. Need you to respond and be at the airport as soon as you can. At the time when we were mobilized, we had no way of knowing how serious the fire was on board.
James must get from Houston to New Orleans as quickly as he can.
The company that owns the rig says there was no sign of trouble before the blast, and it's too soon to know what may have caused it.
The fact that this was such a massive explosion and it is still burning suggests that this was very fast. It was some kind of combustion of a mixture of natural gas and oil, quite possibly.
Everyone can clearly see the extent of the damage that the fire is doing to the vessel. For the U.S. oil industry, this is a massive disaster. The Gulf of Mexico provides more than a quarter of America's oil production. It has 3,500 rigs and platforms and employs 55,000 people. It sends 1 million barrels of crude oil back to shore every day. The ships fighting the fire are oil field vessels that were in the area, but they're having little effect. They're trying to cool specific parts of the rig so that anyone still trapped on board has a better chance of surviving. The fireboats continue to try and cool the rig. But the fate of the missing men is still unknown.
Just wait and see. Wait until we hear something. That's all we can do right now.
Them things blow up out there. You don't know who's alive and who's not.
Out at sea, the search continues. For many of the rescued, there is no quick return to land.
And we sat there and pretty much watched the rig burn for 6 or 7 hours. The images just burned in my head. I'll never forget watching that. We all got in a big group on the boat of the deck. You know, we figured out, we were missing 11 guys. And we just kept praying that somebody would find them.
The Coast Guard hasn't given up. 4 helicopters and a plane fly continuous missions, searching the Gulf.
It's a horrible thing, but when something like this does happen, I feel like we're trained well enough to respond. We're creating search patterns based on conditions on scene out there. We have computer programs and stuff that help us analyze the currents, and we launch assets accordingly. Our goal is to save everybody. We just don't give up. Just continue the search.
As Assistant Salvage Master James Waite makes his way to Houston Airport, he knows 11 men are still missing.
Of course, when the word came out, not all were accounted for. In your mind, everything changes. Now your emphasis shifts from that of a simple firefighting evolution to a search and rescue operation supported by a firefighting evolution. And you start hoping that you can have some success with the search and rescue.
To have any chance of putting the fire out and saving the rig from sinking, the salvage team has to board the Deepwater Horizon. And they need their own special firefighting gear with them. All of it must reach the burning rig as soon as possible.
Any ETA on your trucks? Any info on that?
The equipment they need, all 42 tons of it, will be taken to the coast by truck.
That'll be good. All right. I was on the phone immediately and started looking for vessels. We started calling all of the boat companies.
The boat that will take the salvors out to sea is located in Port Fourchon, which serves 90% of the Gulf industry's deep-water platforms. But the burning rig is at least 10 hours by boat from Fourchon. The convoy of 4 trucks and James Waite are heading there as fast as they can.
All right, good. The trucks are going to leave here somewhere at 3 or 4 o'clock, I think. So they should be down there just about midnight by the time you guys are ready.
The salvage team from Holland is also still en route. In Fourchon, the other member of the salvage recon team arrives. It will be his job to coordinate the work of the salvors once they get to the rig.
It's a very mixed feeling, you know. On the one hand, it's a major disaster. On the other hand, it's also a big job waiting for you.
Tonight's breaking news, the frantic search for those 11 missing oil rig workers. Admiral Landry, do you have any sense whether there are any survivors here?
We don't want to give up hope that we might be able to find the 11 unaccounted for personnel, so we have an active search and rescue case going on throughout the night.
It's not over yet. It's not uncommon for us to find people after they've been in the water for a day or two.
The trucks with the emergency salvage gear are now in Louisiana. But this is no cause for celebration. 11 men are still missing, and hopes are fading. In Port Fourchon, the first of the trucks with the emergency salvage gear arrives. It needs to be unloaded quickly.
Okay, you truck number 1.
Which is where Steve Boudreau comes in.
Okay, I'm Flash.
He's one of the crew's top engineers.
Everybody knows me all the way around the world as Flash Boudreau. Then that was going to come off? The 3-inch here is going to come off?
And they call him Flash for a reason, is he can outwork any 3 people that I've ever met, that's for sure.
Who's all this stuff?
Nah, it's technical stuff I can't tell you. If I tell you, I gotta kill you. Call me time!
Although the first truck is unloaded, the boat can't set sail until the truck with the firefighting gear arrives, and it's nowhere in sight. Meanwhile, the salvage recon team is 8 hours into their boat trip and getting their first view of the Deepwater Horizon.
You could see the fire for hours before we even got on scene. It was that intense. You could see the fire billowing into the air over the horizon.
It's a horrendous, terrific fire. I mean, it's unlike anything you've ever seen.
There's in the water on one side.
So you see a huge structure. It's about a football pitch that big, and the flames are about I think about 200 feet up in the air. So it's huge.
Both men realize there is little chance anyone else survived the initial blast.
Emotionally, what's going through your head, it's kind of hard to explain, but there's a real connection amongst people that go to sea. And when you know that there are souls that are left unaccounted for, you can't help but feel it. And it impacts how you fight the fire.
How to fight the fire is the question everyone is asking. The flames are showing no sign of relenting.
It began with a powerful explosion less than 24 hours ago. A column of flames shooting into the night sky over the Gulf of Mexico. At last word, the oil rig still was burning and could topple into the water at any moment.
The source of that fire is predominantly coming from the wellhead itself. It's crude oil that is leaching from this wellhead. And as long as that crude is leaching, we're going to continue to see that fire.
The fire is being fueled by oil flowing up the riser pipe from the seabed.
And what we're doing now is they've got a remotely operated vehicle, a subsurface vehicle, that can work to secure that source, to plug that wellhead, if you will.
ROVs are remotely operated underwater robots. They're being used to try to close the safety valve on the ocean floor, the blowout preventer, or BOP as oilmen call it. This valve should have cut off the flow of oil when things started to go wrong. Saving the rig is now dependent on the rescue team's ability to close off the well and stop the flow of oil to the surface and the rig.
From our perspective, the only way that this fire was going to be able to evolve into the next phase of the firefighting evolution was not until the fuel could be secured on board the rig.
If the well can be sealed, the fire will become less fierce, and the firefighting salvors can get on board to put it out. This salvage team is renowned for its firefighting skills. 2 years ago, when a truck ferry was burning uncontrollably in the Adriatic, they were charged with saving the vessel. The team was able to get on board to extinguish the fire and save the ship. In New Orleans, the charter jet with the second backup team from Holland lands. They're on schedule despite exceptional circumstances.
Leading the news this afternoon, we're live as a cloud of volcanic ash turns Britain into a no-fly zone.
Luckily for the salvors, the European controllers who shut their airspace for 6 days opened it just in time for them to take off.
We were lucky in that respect because I know that the Icelandic volcano has put air travel into a turmoil, and that had just subsided that day or the day before, really, to open up the airspaces. And in that regard, we were fortunate enough to get a charter aircraft immediately for the crew coming out of Holland.
But the team still faces an 85-mile journey to Port Fouchon, where Flash is unloading his second truck and already hurrying up the other two.
Hello? Yeah, listen, Ray just called, and we got one truck that's kind of falling behind.
Out at sea, the firefighting boats continue to hose down the structure of the rig to cool it so it will stay intact longer.
There's a tremendous amount of concern about the fact that this rig was not on a stable footing. Its dynamic positioning system was out.
Because it wasn't really a rig fire, you know, it was a well fire. The whole well was on fire and it was spitting out oil like crazy. you don't really know how long a rig can sustain that kind of heat.
Under the rig is burned.
Yep. If they blow the riser pipe, it may go.
And the only thing that was tethering it to the seabed was the riser. And in the back of our minds, we were all thinking that now if it was to rupture at the hull, now we have an uncontrolled release which could hit the underside of the rig, spray out and hit our response vessels.
Hey, Paul, come look at this. You think they steaming?
But you don't really think about that.
The salvage team from Holland is now at Port Fouchon. They too face a long voyage before they can see for themselves what they're dealing with.
It was about 10 hours steaming?
Yeah, but with the current around the mouth of the Mississippi, 10 to 12 hours.
The game plan is to get everything loaded up and then proceed out. And we'll see what we've got left when we get there. The one issue is time. They need to shut down the gas supply as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we'll put that third one there. He said we can have that over.
If they cannot, then it's going to be a more complicated situation.
If the oil flow can be stopped, they'll board the Deepwater Horizon to fight the fire face to face. These salvors are trained to fight fires at sea, relying on their state-of-the-art breathing apparatus and flame-retardant suits to keep them safe.
Conventional firefighting on an oil rig or a ship, you have set goals, which you've been trained and drilled in. You try and establish fire boundaries. And you do that by simple things such as closing watertight doors and bulkheads and cooling bulkheads and set a boundary that the fire cannot progress past, much like a firefighter, a forest firefighter does when he digs a trench. And then you progress through the oil rig or the vessel in a way that you extinguish the fires and cool and overhaul the fires so they don't rekindle. But this particular case was everything but traditional. This was not a traditional oil rig fire. This was an uncontrolled oil well fire with incredibly intense heat, sufficient to keep the firefighters at bay until that fuel could be cut off.
Out at sea, there is no let-up for the Coast Guard. Their helicopters are using local rigs for fuel stops as they continue to search for the missing men.
Well, there's some rigs up here in front of us.
It's a large helicopter, but from what we can carry in the back, it's relatively small. We have at most 3 hours of time aloft before we have to refuel.
Okay, well, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little line of lights off to the right.
We're flying as close as to a half mile to a quarter mile, circling the rig, looking for survivors in the water, and also using that rig to use as a reference point.
You just keep trying. You keep trying as long as there's a possibility of them to survive. You just keep going. You give it 100%.
James and Yost haven't given up hope yet, but things are getting worse.
That back order's gone.
You start hearing explosions. You hear them all through the night. You hear vessels building up steam and then blowing apart, and then you hear steel on steel, things falling down.
That crane's gone. You can see where the crane, there it is. Yeah, where the crane was. Look, there's the crane rack. It's melted.
The flames are still too intense for anyone to board the rig. They haven't been able to close off the oil flow from below. Meanwhile, in Fouchon, Flash continues to make preparations.
The rig and everything is still on fire. As soon as we can get the fire and everything shut down, that's when we really got to go into play.
There is still no news on the 11 missing men.
Everybody has the same thing on their mind, is what about the other guys? The people that we still have to be accountable for. And I think that's the most important thing, because everything else can get fixed.
The Deepwater Horizon has been burning nearly 30 hours. It's now headline news around the world.
Good morning. At least 11 people are missing after an explosion on an oil rig off the coast of the American state of Louisiana. The rig, which had 126 workers in total, is burning hours after the explosion.
For the second time since the initial explosion, the sun rises to reveal a clearer picture, and it's not a good one.
It's just an incredible amount of heat. And over time, that heat just structurally degrades the steel. And that was very evident when the sun came up, that there had been some serious degradation of the structural integrity of the rig. And you could actually see what used to be incredibly stout steel sagging like a clothesline. You could see steel structures that were blazing cherry red.
Feel the heat from it now.
Early in the morning, the explosions on board, they started to become more frequent, and you hear the fire roaring, and when you hear all these big steel structures falling down and collapsing, it's an overwhelming type of sound.
Back in Port Fourchon, the firefighting equipment from Houston arrives.
All those boxes come. The hydraulic hoses come.
They're not out of the woods yet. Flash still has to get the gear onto the salvage boat, and he knows he's short on time.
We got a job to do. We have to be there. People are waiting.
But it's a 10-hour journey out to sea, and the rig may not last that long. For everyone, the real threat is the possible damage that could occur below the surface. The area around the Deepwater Horizon is littered with undersea oil and gas lines from other rigs. These pipelines will be vulnerable if the burning rig breaks loose and starts to drift out of control.
If the riser was to separate from the wellhead, and that concern is twofold, now you have a rig which is going to continue to burn as it drifts across the Gulf of Mexico with a 5,000-foot tail riser dragging across the bottom like a big anchor, which could damage any number of subsea pipelines and other assets that could cause a catastrophe. And now you've got a oil spill where before you had near complete combustion of the oil that was coming out of this rig. Now you would have no combustion at all in an oil spill. Catastrophic consequences of the worst kind you can imagine. One that you can't stop, one you can't access, one 5,000 feet below the ocean.
The ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, are still trying to close the blowout preventer valve and shut down the oil well.
None of us said it, but we all had a very sinking feeling in our hearts that if they didn't get the oil secured, that our chances were rapidly decreasing that we'd be able to save the vessel.
At salvage headquarters, more specialists arrive. This team will work out how to tow the rig back to port if the fire can be put out.
What it looks like is that the well is feeding the fire. As long as the fire is raging like this, that you can't do anything.
Unless something can be done, the situation will get a whole lot worse and become a far bigger disaster.
The potential for a major disaster is always there. Oh, you know immediately that this is major. That's for certain. Anything with explosions and fires in the middle of the night on an oil rig or a ship or any type of situation, you know it's major.
For the local residents and the fishermen waiting and watching along the entire Gulf Coast, the consequences of a major oil spill would be dire, even though it's 50 miles out to sea.
This is the gateway right here to the Gulf.
It's bad on the environment, you know. Like for the fish, the shrimp, the crabbing. It's bad for the fishermen. That makes their living doing that.
But for everyone, time has run out.
At about 10 o'clock in the morning, for about 15 minutes, you know, you really heard a lot of really loud noises. So we knew it was something was going wrong.
As we were combating the fire, we could hear the rig creaking and groaning and settling. And during that period of time, there was multiple explosions, some of which was propelling debris up in the air. Just listening to this rig, you were listening to a ship die.
You hear like cranes falling down and decks collapsing and everything.
At that point in time, you know, I issued a warning to all the firefighting units to be ready for emergency escape.
Then when at 10:15 the list started changing, you started to see it changing rapidly.
And from my vantage point on the stern, which was directly in eye shot of the lowest point, we could see the aft starboard corner starting to slowly drop into the sea.
It was about 5 or 7 minutes before the complete structure went down.
We started to back off, and by 10:22 she was gone. She slipped under the waves.
That's a pretty indescribable moment. You see it going down after, you know, these vessels have been fighting the fire for 36 hours and, you know, everybody doing their best to save this.
When you lose a vessel, it's just a somber moment. You feel the loss. You feel the failure. I think, unfortunately for us, we were fighting a losing battle from the start.
Happening now, disaster upon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico as a burning oil rig sinks, raising fears of an environmental nightmare.
As the Deepwater Horizon sinks 5,000 feet to the ocean floor, there's no sign of any oil coming from the wellhead or the riser pipe. Somehow, it seems, the flow has stopped. While the fire continues to burn off oil on the surface of the sea, the salvors are already concerned that this drama is not yet over. The well might not be fully sealed.
It's in 5,000 feet of water. Of course, it's got the potential to be catastrophic, but truthfully, I don't know to what degree.
The salvage team won't play any further part. Their job ended when the rig sank. For Dirk Jan and his firefighting team, it's a depressing moment. They're going home.
It's very sad to see such a piece of equipment go under. So there's no point in going up there.
The Coast Guard is also facing disappointment. 67 hours after the explosion, the search for survivors is called off. The 11 missing men are presumed to have perished in the initial blast.
You think about the victims' families. You have to maintain professionalism and make sure that you are doing your job well and stuff, but it's impossible to separate yourself from the human aspect of what's going on, the seriousness that there were 11 people unaccounted for.
As the enormity of the tragedy sets in, oil from the depths of the Gulf starts to appear, and the slick rapidly grows in size. The big spill quickly turns into one of the biggest pollution emergencies the Gulf of Mexico has ever seen.
Upon exiting the channel, we'll be heading on a course of 260 at a speed of approximately 14 knots.
Once again, the Coast Guard joins the front line as an armada of ships rushes to try and stop the oil from devastating the entire area. This is the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Oak, a state-of-the-art multi-purpose ship, one of many Coast Guard vessels that have been diverted toward the crisis.
This has been designated as a spill of national significance. The latest imagery seems to show it somewhere in the area of 30 to 40 miles offshore.
The spill is spreading westward, and the Oak is looking for the leading edge. It's not always possible to spot the oil from sea level, so planes are used to track and guide the Coast Guard vessels to the right place.
Just give us a call if you sight any oil that the technicians believe is recoverable.
All right, go ahead and slow down in a big way right here, because I think I see something right off the bow.
Soar 7 north, 0K83.
We're going to slow down, come DIW, and we're going to put the arm out.
The Oak is fitted with special equipment to remove crude oil from the surface of the sea.
Fast steaming! Never done this before. We've just done annual training for it, so there's going to be a few growing pains, hopefully nothing too major, but it'll be nice to actually see this equipment put into use and actually recover oil.
They have a pump which sits on the water and skims the oil and other waste into a huge sausage-like bladder, which the Oak tows alongside.
The skimmer itself is pretty simple. It's called a weir skimmer. Only the very top surface of the water, where the oil is allowed to spill over inside. And at the bottom of that dish is a little container that grabs the oil. It gets pumped out through a tube, across the ship's deck, and into the bladder, which will hold all that oil.
This is the first time they've had to use it, and the pressure is on as the spill continues to dominate the national and international headlines.
Meanwhile, 42,000 gallons of oil a day escaping into the Gulf of Mexico. It's already formed a slick measuring hundreds of square miles, and as the oil moves towards the coast, it's threatening marshes, beaches, and wildlife in 4 states.
The Coast Guard is the focal point of the world's growing concern that this disaster is becoming unmanageable.
We've called this press conference, as we have every day, to give you the latest information on the Deepwater Horizon incident.
The Coast Guard is also monitoring the oil industry's efforts to stop the flow of oil from the seabed. No one knows exactly how much oil is spewing into the Gulf. Many think it could be more than 200,000 gallons a day. As the spill continues, NASA satellites show a giant slick the size of Jamaica. They are attacking the oil on all fronts, using planes to drop dispersal agents, burning it, and putting out booms around the coastline to protect the wildlife and beaches. And the oil company is working 5,000 feet below the surface to try and cap the flow. But 30 miles from shore, the crew sees that oil is already affecting the creatures who live in the sea.
So, took a sharp turn to port so that we didn't kill a little turtle. We're out here to save the environment, so if we catch a turtle in the process of saving the environment, I guess we're not really doing our job.
The Oak skimmer has sucked up 25,000 gallons of crude, and the bladder they store it in is full. ready to be loaded onto a supply vessel and taken back to shore to be safely disposed of. The contents of one bladder, when refined, would be enough to fill the tanks of nearly 1,000 cars. As the Slick migrates toward the coast, the Oak plows on. The crew knows that they won't be returning home anytime soon. In the weeks to come, they continue to track the leading edge of the Slick, becoming faster and more skilled at skimming oil. A month after the rig disaster, the Oak is positioned near the Chandeleur Islands and has collected over 100,000 gallons of crude oil.